Hello and welcome to the Ukraine Shelf, a podcast produced by the UCL European Institute, UCL School of Slavonic and East European Studies, and the Ukrainian Institute London, and supported by the British Academy. My name is Olesa Chromychuk. I'm a writer and historian and the director of the Ukrainian Institute London. And I'm joined by my co-presenter and co-creator of the podcast, Oyun Blacker, associate professor in Ukrainian and East European culture at UCL.
In each episode of the Ukraine Shelf, together with our guests, we seek out the best books about Ukraine that are available in English and think about those that should be translated from Ukrainian or other languages. We'll be adding all these brilliant books to the Ukraine Shelf and hoping that this shelf will also appear in our listeners' libraries.
And helping us today build this Ukraine Shelf are Artem Chapeye and Daisy Gibbons. Artem Chapeye is a Ukrainian writer, journalist, translator, and member of the Ukrainian Armed Forces. He currently has 3 books available in English translation: The Ukraine, a collection of short fiction and creative nonfiction translated by Zenia Tompkins, part of which appeared in The New Yorker; The Weathering, a dystopian novel set in Ukraine and translated by Daisy Gibbons, and Ordinary People Don't Carry Machine Guns, also translated by Zenia Tompkins, which is a collection of essays relating to the current war. All 3 of these are published by 7 Stories Press. Artem's books regularly appear in the shortlist of various prizes, both in Ukraine and beyond, and have been recommended to readers by the Washington Post and Le Monde. Welcome, Artem.
Thank you. I'm very glad to be here.
And Daisy Gibbons is a translator who, when not working for the military and defense tech sectors, translates poetry, prose, and drama from Ukrainian into English. As well as Artem's The Weathering, she has translated work by a range of authors, Ukrainian authors, including Mariana Kianovska, Tamara Horikha-Zernia, Artem Chapeye, and Lesia Ukrainka. And for her translation of Lesia Ukrainka, she won the inaugural Ukrainian Institute London Translation Prize back in 2023. She has also recently finished translating Sofia Andruchovich's epic novel Amadoka. Congratulations, which is due for publication in 2027 with Simon & Schuster. Welcome, Daisy.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here.
It's so great to have you both with us. I want to start with you, Artem, and in the author's note to The Weathering, you quote the Turkish writer Orhan Pamuk in his book Snow, where he talks about how when a German poet writes poetry, they are seen as speaking on behalf of humanity. But when a Kurdish poet writes poetry, they're seen as producing ethnic work, ethnic literature that's just specific to them. This also really reminded me of the Yugoslav writer Danilo Kish. And he wrote this essay called Homo Politicus, where he said he sort of complained about the way that Eastern European writers were seen as homo politicus, so as defined entirely by politics, whereas Western European writers are seen as homo poeticus, so people defined by the pursuit of art and beauty. And I want to ask you about that distinction and those different perceptions in the case of your own work and in the case of Ukraine. Do you feel that distinction in the way that you are perceived? Do you feel like it's changing? Can it change while Ukraine is still defined in the eyes of many by the war?
Hello. I believe that, unfortunately, this is even more the case for Ukraine now, because most people in the West see Ukraine or have first started learning about Ukraine because of the Russian invasion. By the way, I always have to repeat again. When I hear a war in Ukraine, it's not a war in Ukraine, it's fighting off the Russian imperialist invasion. There's a difference. And as for what you were talking about, yesterday I was at a European Writers' Festival here in London, organized by the British Library and UNIC, and the Czech writer was also telling about the same thing. If you're thinking about Milan Kundera, he writes about love, but his story is told on the background of the Russian or Soviet invasion in Czechoslovakia. Unfortunately, this is the case for much of Eastern Europe, because we have had very complicated history. And the Czech writer at the festival, he also quoted a Polish poet, I can't remember the name now, who said, when I'm writing about spring, I want to write about spring and not about Poland. But somehow, every time you write about love, you write about, you write about adultery, you still have to write it. It still has to be against the background of some political events. And this is our curse, probably. But on the other hand, what I'm seeing now is that many Western writers tend to try and also write, well, about other countries. Sometimes, I think Andrei Kurkov told it, that sometimes he feels like when the life becomes too, well, comfortable, people seem to look for conflict outside. We are now seeing a surge of Western, not only Western, but like foreign writers trying to write about Ukraine. On the other hand, when we Ukrainians write about Ukraine, it has to be political. Now it cannot be unpolitical. But yes, in the preface of the book The Weathering, in the preface for the English readers, I write about it because this is something that many writers in, well, to put it in Wallerstein term, like the periphery, who are not from the core countries, feel accursed by this. Feel accursed by that we are being as if relegated to the role of just ethnic or regional writers, whereas each of us is as much a human as people in the core countries are. And moreover, statistically, most people live in the periphery. It's not only about Eastern Ukraine. Most people live in countries like African countries or Latin American countries or Asian countries. So why is it that we see only people who write, let's say, in English or in Russian as talking about the great human issues and the others only about the regional issues? Most of the issues that we're talking about are general human issues like poverty, like inequality, and unfortunately war is also something that is quite common, and the people who have not experienced war are the lucky ones. In my next novel, which has appeared in Ukraine, I am actually writing about it, how only some generations and in some countries are lucky enough to never have experienced wars. And generally, many of us, you mentioned Yugoslavs. The Yugoslavs had to experience it, and unfortunately many of us have to. So I would like to, and thanks to the translators, thank you Daisy who is being here, thank you to Zenia, Tompkins, and generally I believe it's the translators who can make any literature a part of the world literature.
I want to pick up on that, actually. Daisy, I want to ask you, I mean, that is one of the main roles of the translator, is to make lesser accessible literature more accessible and more universal. Tell us a little bit how you approach this kind of cultural translation as well as linguistic translation. So the book is also about love and not just about Ukraine. Not love, I don't know, other things, but not only about, sort of specific things related to Ukraine. And especially given the fact that most readers are encountering Ukrainian literature now through, in the context of Russia's war against Ukraine.
I don't know. I wouldn't say that I'm on a particular crusade to try and get people to know about Ukraine beyond the war. At all. I think the quote that Artem just said about Andrei Kurkov about people getting comfortable so they look for adventure elsewhere can probably sum me up a little bit. I kind of do a lot of this stuff because I find it really interesting and I'd like other people to hear about it. And to be honest, I think a lot of Ukraine that I encounter is actually through war as well. And I'm constantly encountering Ukraine via war. I'm also voyeuristic. I'm also on the other side, but because obviously I only first really came to know Ukraine after Maidan. That was when I first started. I saw the news, I was studying Russian, and I thought, okay, let's try and learn some Ukrainian. But obviously your first encounter is through, well, then it was Maidan and then then the conflict broke out. My first encounter was via war, but then I found everything else that's behind it. And then you keep going, don't you? Because you're like, well, this is gorgeous, this is lovely, this literature is fantastic. People should read it, because I was reading literature that was from a long time ago, and it was magical realist. It was about sort of love stories between Hutzel and a lady who looks like the red-haired Madonna, and it seems very sexy for something written in the late, fin de siècle. And that's it. I also encountered it first via war, but then you keep going deeper and you want more people to see the stuff that's behind it.
Was there one specific work of literature that was, most inspiring to begin translating into English from Ukrainian? When you thought, right, okay, now I'm going to give it a go and bring this type of literature to, I don't know, to people who cannot access it in Ukrainian like you could.
I think I had a very high opinion of my abilities when I was an undergrad student. And
we all do.
I thought, you know what, I can go and translate Ukrainian classics, and doing my ruddy undergrad. But it was reading Ukrainian sort of classics that were on it would be in the Ukrainian school program, but we were reading it at university, and it was reading really Mikhailo Kotsybensky, it was reading Olga Kobylyanska, it was reading Lesya Ukrayinka, so your biggest prose writers of that sort of earliest period. Maybe not the biggest, but anyway. And I just thought, and I remember reading the translations because I needed it back then to very slowly get through the Ukrainian, and they were a bit stiff. And they weren't creating those picture images in my head. They weren't creating that awe that the Ukrainian was, even though my Ukrainian was limited. And I was like, somebody needs to feel that one day. So that kind of got me into dabbling in Ukrainian literature. And one day those things will be translated and we'll be creating those wonderful pictures in people's heads. So that's how it started.
We're going to come back to this question of what should be translated.
Yeah.
And we should also give a shout out, I think, to Cambridge Ukrainian Studies Programme, which is where you got your start. And Rory Finnan, the director of that programme, was our first guest on the first podcast when we talked about Crimea. Sticking to this question of, the specific and the local versus the universal and the global, whatever, I want to ask about the genre of The Weathering. So this is a novel which is not about contemporary Ukraine. It's not about this war in any direct way, although it does mention it, actually. But it's the kind of post-apocalyptic novel. It's sort of dystopian novel in which people start to disappear due to this kind of mysterious process, which is described as the weathering, which kind of erodes people, and they just kind of vanish. And obviously the population disappears and all of the sort of structures of civilization disappear. And people are brought down to this kind of basic state of subsistence and survival. And I think, my question really is, did you choose this type of genre because it does speak to universal themes about humanity? And I want to just read a little bit which I think really describes this and describes kind of the problem at the heart of this novel. You say, in a stable society, there is at least the illusion of stable rules. But as soon as a crisis erupts, as soon as rules break, you can see clearly how the tacit social contract is reduced to rule by force, even if, as often happens, it is tied to a flirtation with the weak as a visible legitimization of this monopoly on power. So it was with the Varangians, who became the Kiev princes of old in the 900s. So it was with the gangsters who became philanthropists in the 1990s. So it is now with our warriors of the post-apocalypse. I think this is a really nice way of speaking to Ukrainian specifics, but also to very big problems about society and about human nature and so on. So, why choose the genre basically? And am I correct that this was the reason why you chose this genre?
I did not think about universality so much at the time, but I have long been a fan of science fiction in general, and specifically social science fiction. And for example, one of the movies, not books that I can think of, is The Children of Men. It's a post-apocalypse, you must say, that is happening in London. But I was sometimes thinking that why is it that even all the post-apocalypse happen either in New York or in London at best? Or remember...
how many times has New York been destroyed?
The Edge of Tomorrow, even The Edge of Tomorrow is happening in London and in Paris at best. Whereas apocalyptic events are apocalyptic because they influence the whole globe. And of course, being Ukrainian, I wanted to place a story in Ukraine. And as you have read the book, there's even the guys in the novel, they joke about it. They joke about that even after the end of the world, like America has to remain the center of the end of the world, which is not true. It would be interesting to see what happens, like, say, I don't know, in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America. And same goes for science fiction in general, that it doesn't always have to be about like the central powers. As for the genre itself, I think I chose it because this gives you a lot of room for fantasy, for speculation. That's why it's the speculative fiction. This is not the first speculative novel which I've written. My debut was also, it was kind of a dialogue with George Orwell, by the way, because I am a big fan of 1984. But what I missed in the novel was I wanted to see more about the proles. And so my debut work was actually, I first thought it was like the idea was developing as a fan fiction about the proles. And then I thought, but I am living in Kyiv, not in London, and I am living in a capitalist society, not in a totalitarian Ingsoc society. And here I think it's similar, that I have seen so many movies that I like, and the post-apocalyptic novels are best for their atmosphere, for the vibe that you get from the book. It's not so much about the events, it's about the vibe. And I was thinking what would happen to my society, the society already traumatized by war. I must note that in Ukrainian, the book was finished right before the Russian invasion, but you can feel that this premonition is already there. Same as in my other book, The Ukraine. Like now I feel that the premonition of the coming catastrophe was there because we have been living traumatized by the first stages of the Russian interference, like the annexation of Crimea, the start of the war in the Donbass with the help of Russians. And you can feel it, and this is what I tried to imagine, like what a traumatized society would look after the illusion of rules is breaking.
Just also, we've spoken quite a lot on this podcast about literature since 2022 and what's changed in Ukrainian literature. And it seems like the two genres that have really flourished, at least in the first couple of years, was nonfiction, so reportage, a lot of it about obviously the war, but also poetry. So there's a lot of poetry being written in Ukraine as well. But kind of novels, prose seem to have kind of taken a back seat a little bit. And I wonder, I mean, how you feel about your choice of genre after 2022. Is it still appropriate or useful to use this kind of speculative fiction or dystopian fiction? I mean, the other thing I've been hearing recently is that Ukrainian readers are also increasingly turning to kind of fantasy and sci-fi, and whereas in the first couple of years of the war they wanted to read about the war, and now they want to kind of escape, you know. And your kind of futuristic or post-apocalyptic work, you could read it as a kind of escape from reality, but it's not very comforting. You know, it's very disturbing as well. So I just wonder how you see that question after 2022, really.
That's a very interesting question. So the first book which I actually wrote after the war started was after the full-scale invasion started was nonfiction, and it's titled "Ordinary People Don't Carry Machine Guns." It was written in 5 weeks. I mean, on the second year of the war, but it was written very fast. And I think this is your response, because nonfiction takes less time to germinate. Yes, you have to think a lot about it, but then when you go to writing, it's like very fast. Same goes with poetry. Poetry can be written like right in a trench. For example, there's a rise of new wave or new names in Ukrainian poetry, like Pavlovich Shibaba. Like he wrote a letter to his, the poem which is titled "A Letter to My Daughter." And as far as I understand, he was like in the trenches at the time. It was easy. Whereas with novels, it's more complicated. And you're correct that now even like the biggest names in, the best-selling authors in Ukraine are those who write fantasy, I would say, like Ilarion Pavliuk, and the other one is Derevyanko. Both are... Well, they have really emerged after 2022, and this is fantasy, pure fantasy, escaping. With me, the newest novel which I have written is kind of a criticism of escapism, even though you realize that any fiction tends to be escapist, but you can direct your readers back to reality. My newest novel, which is titled Tea Happiness, is exactly this thing. It's about a post-war society where there's a lot of escapism, and how this escapism actually is preventing us from keeping the struggle.
And I want to ask you also, Daisy, about the genre. When you were approaching this novel, obviously it's kind of it's a strange novel, like strange things are happening in it. Words, ideas, concepts are used in strange ways. Like even the title itself, Vyvitruvanya in Ukrainian, which describes this process whereby people disappear.
Fade away.
Yeah, so
vanish.
Fade away. And it's so, and it's something that you have to really find a new language to describe. Was that a challenge for you? Or if that wasn't a challenge, what were the challenges of translating this novel?
General challenges. Well, I had no problem with the sci-fi because it didn't feel particularly sci-fi. It felt like this could definitely happen in
It's quite it's like an everyday apocalypse.
Honestly, because all the jokes about the end of the world on Rusanivka, I don't know, it felt very situated in the place that it was.
And so Rusanivka is the island in the Dnipro River in Kiev.
Where sort of they returned to their flat. And actually what was quite strange is when I started seeing reports from earlier this year in the winter of the awful winter that Kiev had, it actually really reminded me of a couple of things that you'd written about, Artem, in the book, which is certain things about what it's like to have to live when it's cold and there's no light, and it happening in Kiev. Some things actually really did resonate. So it didn't feel very sci-fi at all.
My mom sometimes jokes that I should stop writing about the future because it tends to come true.
Or write something lovely, beautiful about the future.
Yeah. My mum gets angry as well that I keep translating depressing things.
But it's not that depressing. It's funny,
it's quite funny
as well.
Yeah, but yeah, no, what was challenging about it? I mean, well, I think your style, Artem, is quite hard to render into English because you're quite staccato in a way that's so refreshing, because I think quite a lot of Ukrainian prose can be quite overblown. But the problem is that English language doesn't really like when you miss out a subject. You need to have your subject, verb, object in your sentence. So you have to really change the syntax quite a lot. So that was difficult. I think the actual translation difficulties, it was just quite a lot of Ukrainian in-jokes that took me a while to get. Even the thing about the Prima Lux cigarettes, I didn't quite crack on to the idea that it was quite funny that he was leaving Prima Lux cigarettes.
It's
because
like the cheapest cigarettes by the deluxe edition of the cheapest cigarettes.
Yeah, just funny, or just a few things. I definitely had a complete nightmare trying to translate all the birds. Because, I don't know, I was going off on one a little bit and going through Wikipedia trying to find all the Latin sort of types of these birds in Ukraine, and then realizing after I'd already sent it to the editor that I'd used the kittiwake, and then I looked back and I was like, wait, no, kittiwakes are only out to sea birds. They can't be in Kiev. Having to like scramble back going, no, like a different seagull. Oh, I don't know. That was quite difficult, I think. I think it's also just like the challenges in translation are just like your own personal journey. You become better just through experience and through knowing the text better. It was also quite tough because I was trying to juggle it while working in an army camp, translating. So I was kind of like sitting in my bunk, like hunched over.
Well, does that help, or do the two worlds, the military translation or interpreting and the literary translation, do they help each other, reinforce each other, or do you try to keep them separately? How does it work for you?
They interact and they massively help each other. It's just small things like through interpreting, you just get a really good ear for the way that Ukrainian people speak. So I just get very used to hearing syntax, and because of the work in the military, the army is a wonderful little snapshot of society. You get people from everywhere in Ukraine, and you get actually quite a lot of people in the Ukrainian army who aren't actually ethnically Ukrainian, but then are there, Armenians, Afghans, people who, came as refugees when they were younger, grew up in Ukraine and then joined. So really different voices, really different registers, tones, and just that exposure, I think, to different types of Ukrainian helps, because then you start recognizing when people are speaking in that register in a book. The military side does help because obviously since 2022, people deal so much with military themes. And so I actually read quite a lot of translations or things in the, like I'll see an excerpt of something in a newspaper and I'm like, they've used the wrong English term there, and it grates on me. And I remember reading actually your book, Tea Happiness, when because Artem gave me the manuscript just to like have a look and give some ideas of what I thought about it.
As a better reader. Yeah.
And you were using like, I don't know, can I talk about the conceit a bit? Yeah. So basically you can kind of become the drone. Basically, it's an alternative reality when you can.
It's like when somebody asks me if the narrator is me. I'm sometimes writing like as if I am a live drone or a drone with intelligence.
So the drone, you feel the wind flying beneath your wings as the drone, blah blah blah. And at one point, your drone was also a kamikaze drone, but it could also drop. It was a dropper, and I was like, but you don't have that. That's not tactically used. And I was like, but people will think that you don't know what you're talking about, Artem. You need to choose. Like, they'll think that you don't know what types of drones are which ones. So, and having that knowledge, like, of course I would know that. But like, I think your wife missed that.
Did you listen to her advice, Artem? Daisy's advice?
Because that was my idea. Like, I'm not a technical person, but that was my idea of a perfect drone, which can do both.
Who knows? And you predict the future, so maybe we will have one of those drones. Artem, actually sticking with the military, I want to ask you about your other job and how the two combine in your life. Before 2022, you wrote some war reportage, but you were not engaged directly in the armed forces. Tell us a little bit about that decision to join the armed forces directly, and also how does it make you feel to be maybe labeled or presented as soldier writer?
I'm a writer-soldier.
Writer-soldier.
I've been writing since 2008. The thing is that I only started to be translated after 2022, and that's because of the interest in Ukraine in general. This all started with my story, which is titled The Ukraine, being translated and published in The New Yorker, which is one of the most prestigious literary magazines. But the story was written long before I was a soldier. I never thought of becoming a soldier. I was in the army as a teenager for obligatory service, and I hated it.
Conscription,
And, conscription. And to be honest, I still hate the army hierarchy and stuff. Like, for example, in order to come here, one has to write a lot of like requests so that I am let out, and including some reports about how my literature helps the Ukrainian defense in general, which is weird and funny, but this is how armies function, I believe, in all countries. We sometimes thought that the things we don't like about the army are sometimes incorrectly called like the Soviet remnants, but in fact, when you talk to the British Army or the American soldiers, it's the same there.
Something about the institution. And you've described yourself as a pacifist before. So, for somebody who strongly believed in those ideas, to join the military armed forces must have been a particular step. Maybe you could tell us what your thinking process was in 2022.
Yeah, I'm trying to recreate it, and in retrospect, it seems more linear than it was then. So yes, sometime I think right after Maidan, the Ukrainian Revolution, which was violent. Some people were killed by the police. I think I was traumatized, and I tended to turn more and more to the non-violent protest because I was an activist my whole life, and I believed, like in the beginning, I was like direct violence and stuff like that, but I only thought about, direct violence in like how it happens more or less in a country like England, where it's just like some shuffling with the police. And then when you see people killed, it traumatizes you for a long time. And I translated Mahatma Gandhi about his methods of struggle, and I still respect them. But as soon as you see, so the process is like this. You live in fear for the whole year before that, because you can see it coming. You cannot believe it, but you can see it coming. You have your emergency backpacks for you and your children and your wife. And then when it actually comes, you still are in denial. Like, no, this cannot be possibly true. So we were running away for about 2 days, which a road which usually takes 12 hours took us about 36 or 48 hours because of the traffic. And all these times you're reflecting, because you woke up like when it's not just the sound of explosion. I hope that most people never experience it. When there's a massive shelling, it's not the sound, it's like the vibration, it's like an earthquake. And you wake up to this with your 2 kids, who were 7 and 9 at the time, and you start escaping. It's like, this is, well, stressful to understate it. And then all this time you're thinking about what you're seeing on the road. You see these like columns of like hundreds of thousands of refugees. You're one of these refugees. And then you feel like, I am being displaced. I am becoming a victim. And I never wanted to be a victim. And I always considered myself an activist. Then you're thinking, okay, I always considered myself a left-wing person, so I have to be with the people. And now I'm seeing, as we are going outside of Kyiv, like there's many soldiers, and you can see their faces because there's so many of them that they're sitting on top of the trucks, on top of the armored vehicles. And you can see them. It's mostly, well, you can see it's like the common people. And you're like, okay, I always thought that I'm one of these like intellectuals who are with the people. And you're thinking and thinking and thinking about that. And basically, by the time I arrived to my hometown to leave my kids there in Western Ukraine, very close to Romanian border, I already had my decision, and this is something that the first book I wrote after the full-scale invasion. It's a very short book, and about 1/3 of the book is basically about the decision. So ordinary people don't carry machine guns is largely about this decision to be with the people, but also describing the people, because as Daisy have said, Ukrainian army is like this slice of the society. You can see like very different people, especially in the beginning. You could see that it didn't matter. I had some rather rich people in my platoon, but mostly it was like the peasants, the construction workers. So the decision was basically, I see it as a decision about what, not who, but what you want to be. Whether you want to be a victim, somebody who escapes, or an active resistant. And at the time, of course, none of us realized how long it would take. For me personally, the model was the Soviet invasion of Finland. Like when Stalin invaded a much smaller country, there was a lot of bitter fighting and the Soviets were repelled. The Finnish people did lose some of the territory, but it's not about territory. It's about not seeing to exist. And it seemed like, and it still is like that for Ukraine, it's like about not ceasing to exist generally. So I was hoping it would take only a few months, and now it seems naive, but I thought that, in such a short period, they cannot kill everybody, and regardless how it goes, I have a rather high chance of survival physically, but I survive psychologically. Whereas if I escape, if I retreat, if I give in, I would feel that I would not survive psychologically as a person, as who I believe I am and want to be.
Yeah, I guess also because so many people took the decision that you took in those early days, Ukraine can still fight and is still standing.
That's
Absolutely.
also my belief, and it's also something that I write about in the book.
Yeah.
That it's because hundreds of thousands of people, like I stood in long lines, and that was Western Ukraine.
Yeah.
In Kiev, they were even longer.
Yeah.
And I felt privileged that I was accepted, because at the time, many people were like turned away, like, oh, you never were in the army? No. You don't look too fit? No. So I was privileged. When 3 people were turned away, the decisions were made very quickly, sometimes arbitrarily, and it took 15 seconds. And it's like, you have the military, like I did the conscription, which I hated. So you have this document, okay, you're in. And I felt like, I'm like
experience.
the best.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to ask you a difficult question. I know that that's a question that has been discussed in Ukrainian society a lot, and a lot of people are grappling with it because there isn't a clear or a right answer, I don't think, to it. But I'd like to hear your opinion, because I've heard you in one of the interviews say that you get annoyed by literature that talks about war but is written by people who haven't experienced it. I don't think you were referring to contemporary writing. I think you were referring to something that's been written a long time ago. But who do you think has the right to write about this war, Russia's war against Ukraine?
I believe it's not about who, but rather about how. And I think I'm not voicing just my own opinion. Sometimes it feels like when a person is pretending to be in a place where they are not, this is what annoys one. But of course, if somebody, I am now doing a mentorship for a Canadian writer, aspiring writer, who wants to write about his experience, but he's very honest about it. He talks about how he came to Ukraine before the invasion and how now he's grappling with the fact that he's a foreigner and he doesn't have to go, but he has a Ukrainian wife and he wants to live here. This is honest. Whereas when you see that somebody pretends to, write about things that they have not experienced, this doesn't seem very natural.
I want to also turn this question a little bit towards you, Daisy. I mean, and this is a problem that I think about as a translator as well. I've translated in the very first days of the war. I translated a few kind of short pieces by writers who I knew, who just sent me like short articles about their experience of being in Kiev as the Russian army is approaching, just to kind of get it into Western media. But also, I found myself in that position of translating experiences which I have no conception of. I'm not there. I don't know what it feels like, but I'm trying to put it into words for, the English language readers to to understand. And that's also, in a way, taking responsibility. It's also speaking for people who are at war. We kind of are making it's a very presumptive thing to do, I guess, in some ways, even though it's absolutely necessary. So I wonder, how do you feel in that situation? I mean, you're much closer to the war and the army than I am, because you work with the military. But
am I that much closer though? Like, I've never picked up a rifle with live ammunition in it and had to go and fight. Being a translator is quite a nuts job, actually, because you have a lot of power. You're interpreting, you feel it as well. Can you imagine? It's very strange when some people don't understand a language and you're hearing what someone else is saying, and then it's you speaking. Like, you have a lot of power, and same with translation, and you have to be careful about how you wield it. At the beginning of the war, when friends were sending, well, not friends, colleagues or colleagues of colleagues were sending me sort of, can you translate this thing about being in Kyiv or being under shelling or being under occupation? I felt really guilty, actually, that I wasn't there and that I wasn't really part of it. And I thought, God, what am I doing? Just sitting in peaceful London, and obviously I was helping in a way, but I really kind of cut myself up a lot about it. And I think that's what spurred me into trying to spend as much time as possible working in Ukraine and trying to work with the military and stuff like that. And to be honest, you realize that it's all a big system, and I don't know, it almost feels kind of accidental who is really making the difference and who isn't sometimes when it comes to the military. I don't know if you feel like that, because people can be sent to do something completely random when they were really hoping to go and storm a bunch of trenches, and then suddenly they're sitting on a military base in Salisbury having to make sure the barracks are clean. So...
Yeah, that happens too. But I think Daisy is very unique here because Daisy actually works and have worked and still works with the Ukrainian military and spent a lot of time in Ukraine. I think you can tell more about it, because I don't know what I can tell and what I can't.
I think that's what's really helped with translation. I think it's given me a sense that I now have like a license to maybe translate a lot of this stuff. Whereas before I felt embarrassed. I thought, who am I to do this? So I think I kind of almost sought out, but I'm someone who has loads of complexes on whether I should speak on something or not. And I've always had a thing that I've been told by a bunch of people, you should write about what you've been doing. And I said, well, no, I'd rather, considering that I speak pretty good Ukrainian and I can write pretty well in English, I think I'd rather let people who are writing in Ukrainian maybe be read rather than what I've got to say. Because I feel like I'd just be like another ruddy Cambridge grad turning up to Kyiv and being like, oh, look at the...
I've been here a week, I can write now.
Yeah, like, wow, look at the...
This is absolutely fascinating to hear this kind of crossover between what you do and to continue that theme, Artem. I mean, you're a man of many talents. I said, let's talk about your other job. There's another job that we can talk about, and that is that of a translator. You've translated literature into Ukrainian. You've translated some of the key works of postcolonial theory, including Edward Said. You managed to teach yourself French, if I am not mistaken, while serving in the army. That is pretty extraordinary. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that. But the question I have, we discuss on this podcast what should be translated from Ukrainian literature into English, but what would you like to see translated into Ukrainian? What do you think people are craving at the moment?
To be honest, I read more in other languages than in Ukrainian, so I don't really follow what has been translated and what hasn't. But I would like to talk about what I think needs to be retranslated into English, and that's Kotsiubinsky, who I believe, Mikhailo Kotsiubinsky is the beginning of the 20th century, and I believe he's he's my favorite prose writer that we have had, because he has written very different stuff. Like Intermezzo is very poetic, and at the same time, it touches on the revolution of 1905 and its aftermaths, the repression in the Russian Empire. On the other hand, he wrote a very social and rather urban novel, Fata Morgana. And he also wrote very weird and like this pre-Gabriel Garcia Marquez magic realism stuff about the Hutzels, about the mountains. So he's a man, and I wonder, I don't know how to translate it, how it can be translated. Each time he as if spoke a different Ukrainian language. He wrote in very different styles.
Yeah, and people listening, if they're up on their cinema history and kind of Ukrainian Soviet cinema history, they might know the film Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors by Parajanov, so one of the most famous Ukrainian films, but also kind of in the history of Soviet and European cinema, very famous. And that was based on Mikhailo Kostyubinsky's work. But I know this is a writer that you, Daisy, are also very interested in.
Well, yeah, I mentioned him earlier. I love Kostyubinsky. I think him and Kobylanska were the two where suddenly made me go, oh, this needs to be well known. I mean, again, that high opinion of myself. I'd love to have a crack at Fata Morgana. Well, I might have a crack at Fata Morgana next year if I get a grant. So let's see. But yeah, I second. He really should be in English.
And what about translating into Ukrainian? Do you have some ideas?
I think a bit more of the sort of, I think more like that sort of first half of the 20th century, like modernist British stuff. So I think like we have always talked, me and Artem have talked always about D.H. Lawrence because I'm obsessed.
By the way, Sons and Lovers by D.H. Lawrence and Lady Chatterley's Lover, as far as I know, they have not been translated into Ukrainian.
Lady Chatterley has been by Solomia Pavlichko.
Oh, yeah.
But not Sons and Lovers. As far as I can tell, and I've done a little bit of research, I think it's in Russian. I don't know. And I think a lot of his other books, like Women in Love and The Plumed Serpent and stuff, aren't in Ukrainian. I'd love to see him in Ukrainian. And I think more of like that ilk and some of the more kind of weird writers of that sort of set would love to see more. And I'd actually like to see a bit more of maybe war poetry in Ukraine, that like they're so important for British culture, sort of our trench poets. Not because I want to like compare the experience or something like that. It just might be interesting for people to see how it was written about in a different way in a war that was 110 years before.
I wanted to add on that. I still feel like much more is being translated from English into Ukrainian than on the contrary. And I feel that what we're missing is translations from other less, I don't know how to put it. Like, I wanted to say less imperialist languages, but from languages that are not English or German or French or Russian into Ukrainian. This is something that we're missing because very often this is something we started with so-called world literature, is the literature in the 4, let's say 5, maybe
dominant languages.
Languages with most, and I would like to see, for example, an Albanian writer like Kadare being translated directly into Ukrainian. But I realize how complicated it is because you would need a very talented person to know both languages. Like I'm kind of criticizing, but I myself know English, Spanish, and French. Yeah. So, and I admire a lot people like you, Uyam, who have taught themselves like Ukrainian, and we know that you have translated Mike Johansson. Mike Johansson is also one of my favorite writers, and I'm very grateful that he has been translated into English.
But you're very hopeful about AI, aren't you? You think that might create sort of level playing field for lesser known languages in the future? Maybe not yet, but in the future.
I'm not as much afraid of AI as I feel many people in Western Europe are, because I believe that calling it intelligence, it is a marketing gimmick. I would rather call it something like CAT, a complex algorithm tool. That's what it is, basically. And I believe it can help in translations, but it can never grasp the humor, never say never, but I write sci-fi, and I don't see the potential so far for it to really replace people. Because one time people said that a calculator will replace mathematicians. It can't. You still have Vyazovska, who is Ukrainian, the Fields Prize in mathematics. You still need people for that. And I believe it will be the same for literature. So I'm not like optimistic about I'm saying that this can become a tool. Like now that I'm writing, I'm using an online dictionary for Ukrainian conjugations, which are complicated even to Ukrainians. So this is something of the sort. You have to treat it as a tool, not as either see it as good magic or evil magic. That's what it is.
Yeah, I somehow doubt that AI translator would know, would understand the joke about Vatra Lux cigarettes.
Yeah. I don't know though. Sometimes for fun, I do quite like bunging in a bit of prose onto AI, and it is depressing how good it is.
The best thing, and I wanted to thank Zenia again for this, is when a translator actually communicates with the writer, because very often it's the writer who can explain things that cannot be translated.
Absolutely.
Thank you both for answering all of our questions. We have to wrap up. I think we could talk to you guys for many, many more hours, but we have to wrap up. And at the end of each episode, we ask our guests to recommend one book that they think our listeners should add to their Ukraine shelf. So we've already been talking about recommendations for translation into Ukrainian, out of Ukrainian. We've heard about Kotsiubinsky, but maybe you could give us one more addition for our readers to add to their bookshelves. Artem, please.
So I hear I'm not original about that, but I'm also a fan of Arthur Drone. And his book is titled Hemingway Knows Nothing. This is a book that made me cry, but I feel this is like this clearing tears.
Yeah, and we've had Arthur Drone has been recommended on the podcast before, and absolutely a very important writer-soldier or soldier-writer,
and
however you want to put it,
as well.
and poet and prose writer.
He was actually in the infantry, so it's like the worst.
Okay. Hemingway Knows Nothing is published with Yantar Books, and it's just recently come out, so it's absolutely worth checking that out. Daisy, how about you?
Sorry, I'm still going with something that isn't in English yet. I said I was allowed to. I don't know why, but my mind keeps going back to Sad Hetsimansky by Ivan Bahriani, so The Garden of Gethsemane. It's a massive book about the Gulag, and he wrote it way before Solzhenitsyn ever did. And from a Ukrainian perspective, sometimes his characters are they can be a little bit surface, but superficial, but I think it's such an important monument of just that he did write about experiencing the Gulag from a Ukrainian perspective. Yeah, it's just an incredibly important book.
Yeah, The Gethsemane Garden is one of the books that I remember most from everything that we read in school. And we read a lot of Ukrainian literature, and this was something very fresh. This seems more like a mass literature, so it should be easy to read. It's like very fast-moving. Really a great book, yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for those recommendations. The full list of books that we've discussed today and our guest recommendations are available in the description of our episode. So please check it out wherever you're listening to it, on YouTube or your favorite streaming platform. And if you haven't done so already, please check out our previous episodes. If you enjoyed this conversation, give us a like, subscribe, and please share widely. And most importantly, keep reading about Ukraine.